Something subtle is happening all the time, a silent dance between what you see and what you project without realizing it. Behind every thought, there is an invisible field sustaining everything you call reality. But this field doesn't respond to words, nor to attempts at control. It responds to something much simpler and more forgotten: the way you observe. To truly observe is not to think about what you see. It is to feel what reveals itself when thought grows quiet. The observing consciousness is not interested in conclusions, but in presence. It does not seek answers. It dissolves the questions. Maybe you've spent years trying to change something on the outside, adjusting behaviors, redesigning routines, chasing goals. But deep down, the landscape remains the same, because what changes the landscape is not the effort to move the stones, but the vibration of the one who sees. And what if everything you seek is not in a new technique, in more effort, or in some grand revelation? What if real change is already available in the simple act of seeing without a filter? There is a difference between looking and seeing, between seeing with the mind and perceiving with silence. And maybe that's exactly where everything realigns. Not because something outside has changed, but because your inner field has finally stopped resisting. Conscious observation doesn't require you to understand everything. It only asks that you be present, and that is far more transformative than it seems. Have you noticed how certain situations seem to repeat themselves? Even when the people change, the places transform, and time moves on. There's a restlessness that returns in cycles, as if life were trying to show something that hasn't yet truly been seen. And it's not that you haven't tried. Years of searching, reading, therapy, silent prayers, a deep spiritual fatigue sometimes overwhelms you, as if all your inner effort weren't being answered by the universe. As if something was still blocking the flow you so long to feel. But what if the key isn't in doing more? What if what holds you back isn't the situation itself, but the way you observe it? The human mind has been trained to interpret everything, to label, analyze, judge, correct. But there is another kind of seeing, a gaze that doesn't try to fix anything. It simply reveals. And it's in this kind of presence that reality begins to respond in a different way. Conscious observation is not passive. It is alchemical. It touches the subtle field of creation and reorganizes it based on the frequency you emit. And that frequency is not made of words. It is made of silent vibration. Carl Jung once said, "What you deny in yourself appears in the world as fate." And the world, like an attentive mirror, never fails to reflect what has not yet been integrated, not as punishment, but as an invitation. Nothing you experience is random. Every emotion, every resistance, every repetition carries an embedded vibrational code, and as long as you view life through the filter of fear, haste, rejection, or struggle, the mirror will keep showing those same forms. But the mirror doesn't judge, it only reflects. This realization isn't comfortable at first, because it takes the blame off external reality and places the responsibility somewhere much more intimate, a place only you can access. This is not about blaming yourself, nor about saying that everything that happens was attracted by you. That logic is superficial. The truth is subtler. The field of your consciousness vibrates, and that silent vibration shapes the way reality appears to your eyes. When you change the way you observe, even if nothing changes on the outside, something shifts within, and that inner shift changes the kind of mirror life becomes. Maybe you're stuck in an old image of yourself, a persona built from trauma, inherited beliefs, unprocessed pain, and that image filters everything you see. You don't observe reality directly, you observe through that distorted lens. That's why change often feels impossible, because you're trying to redesign the landscape but still using the same eyes. But here's something important. Your eyes are not what sees. What sees is your consciousness, and it's not limited to what you've learned. It can touch other fields. It can access another frequency. It can deprogram what was installed without your true consent. For that, no more effort is needed. What's needed is more silence, more presence, less judgment. To observe consciously is to accept what appears without trying to erase, manipulate, or suppress it. It is to feel the discomfort without running from it. It is to allow sadness to exist, doubt to be heard, the shadow to breathe. Because only what is truly seen can transform. And maybe at this very moment, something inside you is already moving. A small internal shift, a pause, an opening. Don't rush. Don't try to understand with your mind. Feel with your field. The mirror of reality doesn't respond to haste, it responds to presence. And the more you observe with neutrality, the more it stops reflecting the past and begins to reveal what has always been beyond the veil, your vibrational essence. Most people believe they see with their eyes. But what few realize is that you see first and foremost with your vibrational body. The field of perception does not begin at the retina, but in the emotion that precedes the gaze. What you feel shapes what you perceive, and what you perceive reinforces what you feel. That's why even when everything seems fine on the outside, something inside still hurts. Because reality is not just around you, it's resonating from within. When there is fear, reality seems threatening. When there is guilt, the world seems to reflect judgment. When there is hurt, everything feels cold and distant. But when the inner field is crossed by acceptance, even silence gains color. You're not stuck in what you see, you're stuck in what you feel, without realizing that you're feeling. Most of the time, the body carries unconscious emotions, layers of frozen memories, cellular records of undigested experiences, old traumas that continue pulsing as if they were still happening now. And it's these subtle vibrations that define how you interpret the world. You look at someone and feel rejection, but it's not about the other. It's about something in you that still longs to be embraced. You come across an opportunity and feel fear, but it's not about the risk. It's about a wounded part that learned to protect itself too much. You observe your life and feel like it's stuck, but maybe the one that's unmoving is your observation. The mind believes it sees what is. Consciousness knows it sees what vibrates. And this is where silent transformation begins, when you realize you're feeling, even before you know why. When you recognize emotion as the portal, not as the obstacle. To observe consciously is to fully feel what passes through your field without trying to escape. It is allowing yourself to go through anger without projecting it, through fear without hiding, through sadness without getting lost in it. Because each of these frequencies, when felt without resistance, transmutes. The quantum field, that ocean of possibilities in which your reality forms, does not respond to your words. It responds to what you vibrate while you observe. And the purest vibration there is that of feeling silence, the one that doesn't judge emotion as right or wrong. It simply allows it to exist. It's strange to think that so much change can arise from the simplicity of observing with presence. But perhaps that's exactly why many resist, because it requires surrender. And surrender often scares more than pain itself. You've gotten used to fighting, defending yourself, watching over your emotions as if each one needed to be tamed. But emotions are not enemies, they are messengers, signals of what still pulses in your field, waiting to be acknowledged. As long as you observe life with a repressed emotional charge, everything around you seems to mirror tension. But when you allow the emotion to move without judgment, perception changes, and with it reality changes too, not because something outside has suddenly transformed, but because what you feel is no longer trapped in the same cycle. This is the point where observation ceases to be just a concept and becomes a vibrational portal. When feeling becomes conscious, seeing becomes true, and maybe now you can breathe a little deeper. Not because something has been resolved, but because you've touched a subtler level of presence, a point of stillness that doesn't depend on answers, only on inner space. This is where reality begins to bend to the new field, effortlessly, without control, without urgency, and all of it begins and before the gaze, in the feeling. Not all attention is presence, not every gaze is consciousness. Often we think we are observing, when in fact we are resisting. The mind is skillful at creating subtle substitutes for feeling. It analyzes, interprets, explains. It builds theories about itself, and in doing so, it may even seem that there is awareness, but deep down, there is control. There is fear of surrendering to what is. Resistance doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides behind apparent clarity. You tell yourself that you're aware of what you feel, but inside, there is still a knot. There is still a tension trying to avoid the real dive. Pain camouflages itself in mental observation, as if rational understanding alone could dissolve what is vibrational. But vibration doesn't dissolve with ideas. It dissolves with acceptance. Resistance is subtle precisely because it presents itself as care, as protection, as attentiveness to what is happening. But deep down, it's fear of allowing the emotion to simply exist without being controlled. You cannot truly observe while trying to manipulate what you see. Consciousness does not expand from the effort to understand. It opens when presence is stronger than the need for control. Maybe you've felt this way, seemingly clear-minded, but with a heaviness in your body, as if you know everything that's going on inside, but still can't break free. As if the right words are there, but the vibration is still stuck. That happens because the mind knows how to name, but only the heart knows how to release. Resistance is the frequency that slows transformation the most. It doesn't block the flow from the outside. It blocks the flow from within. And as long as you resist, reality will also resist you. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because it faithfully responds to your vibrational state. And if what you're vibrating is tension, fear, a need for control, that is what the field returns. The paradox is that the more you try to observe in order to get rid of something, the less you're actually observing. Because true observation has no intention. It doesn't aim to change, heal, or fix. It simply sees. And in seeing with neutrality, transmutation happens. That neutrality is not indifference, it is a kind of deep love, one that doesn't require transformation to exist. It's the presence that allows everything to be as it is, without haste, without judgment, without conclusion. That's why the quantum field responds to it so precisely, because only in the vibrational silence of acceptance can the old form dissolve and the new emerge. Carl Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And darkness in this context is everything you still try to avoid, even while believing you are observing. All true observation begins with surrender, with the willingness to feel whatever comes without running, without trying to transform before welcoming, without projecting a goal onto the process. When you surrender to what you feel, without wishing it were different, resistance fades, and consciousness finally finds space to bloom. This is the point where reality begins to bend to your new state. Not because you asked for it, but because you allowed it. You stopped fighting what is, and that released a new vibration. Conscious observation does not require effort, it requires truth. And truth always vibrates in the same place, where resistance no longer exists. Perhaps right now you can notice where your observation still carries tension, where you are still trying to use awareness as a form of control. And maybe, just maybe, you can soften that gaze. Allow it to become less analytical and more present, because it's in that gentle, silent gaze that the new begins to be born. You can know everything about yourself and still repeat the same cycles. You can understand your traumas, study your patterns, make intention lists and visualize new beginnings. But if the vibration behind all of that is still trapped in scarcity, fear, or urgency, the field around you will continue reflecting the same scenario. Because reality doesn't respond to logic, it responds to frequency. This is a simple but profound truth, hard to accept when you're used to believing that thinking differently is enough. But the universe doesn't hear your thoughts, it feels your vibration. And the vibration you emit is not in what you say you want, but in what you actually feel while you observe. You can affirm 1,000 times that you are ready for something new, but if your field still vibrates with, "What if it goes wrong?" creation remains tied to the old configuration. You can ask for peace, but if you observe life with anxiety, what returns is more reason to be uneasy. Because what returns is not your request, it's your presence. That presence is not an effort, it's a state, a kind of silence that expects nothing in return, a real surrender, where the now stops being just a moment and becomes a temple, where what exists doesn't need to be changed to be embraced. You don't need to understand all your blockages to release the flow. You just need to stop sustaining them with the same old vibration. You just need to stop resisting what life is trying to show with each repetition. The cycle is not the problem. The resistance to observing what it carries is what prolongs it. As long as you view what happens through the same conditioned gaze, everything stays in the same place. But when you change the point from which you observe, what once seemed immovable begins to dissolve. Not because the world reorganized, but because you are no longer the same. That is the subtlety many ignore. External reality is not the cause. It is the consequence. The way you vibrate while you observe determines the form reality takes around you. And that vibration is born in the space between what happens and what you do with it internally. That's why silence is so powerful. Not the outer silence, but the inner silence where there is no judgment, no expectation, no rush. It's in that state that the quantum field begins to collapse new possibilities. Not because you asked hard enough, but because you stopped the vibrational repetition that kept everything the same. When you observe with surrender, reality reorganizes itself. Because the field of creation is not controlled, it is accessed. And access happens the moment you stop fighting what is. In that instant, there is no longer separation between observer and observed. There is only flow, integration, a new vibration that is born not from a mental desire, but from a felt frequency. You don't need to deserve this transformation. It is already yours, but it can only manifest when you're attuned to the same tone as what you wish to receive. And that tone is not found in the urgency to change. It reveals itself in the space where the old vibration finally dissolves, the space of presence. In that place, even time behaves differently. What once seemed far away comes closer. What once felt stuck begins to move. Not because you cracked life's code, but because you stopped interfering with the energy of resistance. This is where reality bends, not to your logic, but to your frequency. And that frequency is born from the way you choose to observe the now, not tomorrow, not when everything makes sense, but now in this very moment when your field feels that something is being revealed. Because when observation becomes pure, reality becomes new. Perhaps conscious observation is not a new practice, but an ancient remembrance, something your soul knows but the mind unlearned over time. Before knowing how to name the world, you already felt. Before learning to interpret events, you simply lived them. And in that state of sensitive purity, everything was simpler, because there was no distance between what was lived and what you were. Over time, however, you learned to protect yourself, to build inner barriers, to interpret reality instead of feeling it directly. And it was in that effort of emotional survival that contact with presence was lost. But nothing was truly lost. It was only put to sleep under layers of thought, because the one who observes in you never stopped observing. It was only overlaid by louder voices, by expectations, fears, traumas, and memories. The one that sees you from within is intact, and true conscious observation is the return to that silent instance, not as something new to be achieved, but as a state that has always been waiting for you, an inner space that doesn't need to be activated, only unveiled. To see with consciousness is to see without a filter. It is to pass through the mental fog and reach the point where the gaze doesn't divide, doesn't separate, doesn't analyze. It simply recognizes, and that recognition holds the power to heal without touching, to release without acting, to transform without effort, because it operates on the most forgotten frequency of existence, the frequency of being. When you begin to see from this place, life presents itself differently. Even old pains seem to carry a secret light. Even the voids gain texture, and even silence becomes full of meanings that don't fit into words. It's as if everything has been trying to tell you something, but you can only hear it once you stop trying to understand. There is something deeply compassionate in this way of seeing. A gaze that welcomes, even what still hurts, that recognizes pain without identifying with it, that watches old patterns arise and lets them pass, like clouds that no longer trap the sky. And perhaps, at this point on the path, you realize that nothing outside needs to change right now, that there is no urgency, because what is happening inside is already altering the foundation of your field. It is no longer about trying to escape reality. It is about seeing with such wholeness that reality no longer needs to be avoided. It simply transforms in the measure of your truth. At every moment you surrender to this naked gaze, something invisible reorganizes. Something in your field aligns with what has always been. And that which seemed distant becomes part of your being again. This reconnection has no sound, but it has vibration. It has no form, but it has density. And it can be felt in the body as a peace without reason, a presence that sustains, a silence that sees you. To truly see, is to remember what already is, the part of you that never needed to prove anything, that doesn't seek approval nor escape, that simply is, and because of that transforms everything around it, because the field responds precisely to the degree of truth with which you observe. When there are masks, the world responds with illusion. When there is presence, it responds with synchronicity. And maybe that is life's most subtle invitation right now, to abandon the effort to be something else, and simply see, with wholeness, what is already pulsing inside. You don't need to heal before seeing. You heal by seeing. And in this simple but deep seeing, the old vibration loses strength, because what was hidden loses control. The shadow stops ruling when it is looked at with light, not the light of explanation, but the light of silent consciousness. In this space, you begin to live not as someone trying to fix their own story, but as one who has already recognized that everything was part of the path back to oneself. And seeing then becomes a sacred act. Reality doesn't change when you think differently. It bends when you see differently, not with the eyes of the past, but with the presence that emerges when resistance ceases. To observe with consciousness is simpler than it seems, because it requires no effort, only sincerity, only surrender, only the courage not to run from what is. And when what is can be seen in its entirety, it dissolves. The cycle ends, the vibration rises, and the world quietly responds. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but something has already begun to move within, because your gaze is no longer the same. If this passed through your field, write in the comments, "I see with what feels in silence." That way I'll know you stayed until the end, and that something in you has already begun to remember.